It's a nice soft spot. Welcome everyone to another week of me, different cars talking about comic books. And I don't know, just overall generally practicing nerdiness and like steadily my podcast voice. I don't know. I don't think I have a really nice voice to sort of soothe the spirits, but I have a voice, so I better use it. We are already first week of 2026. Again, I've been skipping picking up any sort of news. Most people have been, I mean, not most people, but I've seen a lot of people analyzing the new Doomsday teasers, which I don't really care for. I keep thinking about how they can just blast people with teasers for a whole year until the movie comes out. I don't know, man. I think that's barely news. But to me, the big news is basically the change in X-Men. I made no mystery to the fact that I've enjoyed the current age of X-Men, especially the age of Revelation. But I was really down after the Krakoa era ended. But and overall, everything has been kind of mid, except like Uncanny X-Men, which is my favorite by Gale. I've mentioned it before. There are some good beats there and there. But now I'm gonna take the chance of this first episode of 2026 to actually review the Age of Revelation. I managed to read the finale of Age of Revelation. I haven't finished all of the series, but let's go like quickly through the reasons why I think it's a good event, the reasons why I liked it, and a little bit about each one of the titles that were part of the big event. Of course, I'm not gonna spoil the ending for. I mean, it's just literally the ending. But basically, especially in Marvel, they do this way more than DC, in my opinion. They do these events are setups. This year we had the one World of Doom, which was clearly a setup. But as I said before, I really enjoyed it, and I really liked how it digged into aspects of the characters that they only really get to shine in these circumstances. Basically, Doom's humanity and Doom's frailty. Those things are not often seen. Now we are already heading into the new Doom sort of oriented, which is supposed to be the setup for the next Marvel event. But the point is, Marvel does more events that work as setups rather than events. They do that way much more than DC, in my opinion. DC has like really events that like to not close. I mean, these things never end, but they do these more like self-contained events, which is fine as well. But the point is that Age of Revelation is also kind of that type of event. But I think from an editorial point of view, the Age of Revelation was not like more well managed than what was the One World or Under Doom. But from an editorial point of view, they really squeezed out this event. Out of the recent Marvel events being the Age of Revelation, Imperial, and One World of the Doom, to me the weakest was Imperial. I'm sorry, Jonathan Hickman. Even more so, we see Xavier appearing during the Age of Revelation, and like it makes you wonder whatever happened for the Imperial miniseries where he was in. It wasn't that big of a deal, you know? But anyways, the Age of Revelation event to me had like sort of like a genius proposal from an editorial point of view. So they brought up, I don't know how to call it, like because the assortment of related titles, they are not all of them the same, you know? So let's go briefly through all of them. Amazing X-Men, of course, was the flagship one. We know the whole transfer of consciousness of Cyclops and Beast, and that was the core of the event, leading into the Age of Revelation. resistance against Revelation himself and whatnot. So if the event was good, obviously the flagship was good, so there's not much to say about it. So then you have sort of like the satellite ones, the ones that make no that didn't make that much sense, but they were there, especially uh, binary, long shots, um, rogue storm, kind of like those, because they dealt with characters in a way that is so far away from where they are now. For example, in binary, we know there's a new Captain Marvel series coming up this year, and frankly, she didn't do much as the leader of the Avengers. And we know Phoenix is also still in space. So they are way too far away from what's happening or what happened during the Age of Revelation for this issue to have any weight at all. Then you have like the completely kind of like gratuitous, that's a word, right? But the one that they just sort of feed on whatever the character always does, but in this new setting, which makes you for like it's the equivalent to a really nice one shot. For example, Radioactive Spider-Man, the Unbreakable X-Men, right? Which ones? Cloak or Dagger. Those are issues. I mean, issues. Those are titles that dealt with characters just to sort of give us the core values and the core elements of those characters in this particular setting. Well, you know they don't have that much of a weight on the present. For example, Radioactive Spider-Man featured on May becoming a mutant, right? And that creating a whole world of emotional problems for Spider-Man, Peter Parker, which we know is something that happens quite often. So this doesn't really change much, you know. The same for Cloak or Dagger. Cloak or Dagger, I think, out of all of these issues, calling, calling them issues, just call them titles. Out of all of these titles, Cloak and Dagger was the one that I ended up recommended the most because I think, as I said many times, I don't think this is a duo of heroes that gets featured that much. Actually, I don't know if they have anything coming up after this. And well, it's good to see them and moving forward in a way, knowing that they will probably never be as prominent as they could be on a solo series. Eventually, they're gonna be like, I don't know, new Avengers, and they're gonna have Cloak and Dagger there, and it's gonna be like a big deal. But that's not really how it's gonna go. And then you have like the weird ones that to me had way more potential and did nothing. Or not nothing, but they were just okay, like Expatriate X-Men with Kamala, Miss Marvel, and the X-Vengers with Danny Munster. I mentioned, I think I mentioned both at some point or another. And I really like the ideas and notions they were introducing, but since they didn't do what the main titles did, whatever happened in those um, titles, it seems like irrelevant. I don't know how whatever happened with Dani is gonna come back for her like her upcoming solo series. But for example, if you take what happened in the last Wolverine, um in Sabretooth, Laura Kinney's Sabretooth, in especially in Iron and Frost, which is one of the feature titles. If you take whatever happened in those, which is quite important character wise, you know those are gonna come back somehow. As I mentioned before, Iron and Frost directly ties to the present. How is that gonna be an impact? You don't really know, but you know that these are elements that are not a mere what if. It happens with Laura, it happens with Emma and Tony in this case in particular, right? So you had the whole variety of titles involved in this big event, and I'm trying to mention them all a little bit just to sort of acknowledge how they did way better with this event than they did with One World Under Doom, or even more so, Imperial. You can see how they stretch the characters, they cover the topics, they use the event as a tool for telling more stories, and in the end, that just makes up for a better event, for a way more better event. Even though it has that, how can you say it? There's always a degree of cheapness in time travel, especially in comic books, like sort of like a Joker card, right? I think a tool that works for everybody. It's like, okay, you can go to the future, go to the past, and make ludicrous things happen, and then you see how they relate to the present. But in the end of the Age of Revelation, we already know that the present got quite affected by it. We haven't seen the effects of other titles like Iron Man and Frost, which I mentioned. They had direct ties to the present. We haven't seen all of them, but you see, these entanglement of like things that happen in the event were great. They made for a great event. They made for an enjoyable what if, and at the same time an interest. No, it's not a what if. Interest what now? Well, what I'm trying to say, it made for an interesting thing to think about if it would happen, and at the same time, it made for a great thing to think, like, what does this mean for the present? And that you gotta love it. And it sort of brought back the X-Men to like the spotlight. I think they lost it after the Age of Krakoa. And well, I mentioned it before. Part of me and probably many people thought that Imperial would be, oh, the Inhumans are coming back. But man, Imperial was so underwhelming. Like, like out of all the Marvel events, I think it was my least favorite, considering how hyped I was about it, and considering it was Jonathan Hickman. I think it went nowhere. It went nowhere. And there are still some ongoing sort of side titles or like fallout from Imperial that are fairly interesting. I mentioned Wigan before, whatever is going on with Nova. I've never been a fan of Nova particularly, but it's fair. And of course, Planet She-Hulk. Planet She-Hulk is like probably the most interesting one. But anyways, going back to the Age of Revelation, I gotta say, I enjoyed the hell out of the event, mostly because of that, because they spread out correctly. They used all of the titles involved to like play all the angles to make different vibes, as I said. The ones that imply a lot for the present, the one that expand on the characters or give them like a particular moment in time to shine or like to make a spotlight on their morals and whatever, like in Radioactive Spider-Man. It was a well-rounded event. It wasn't as impactful as One War Under Doom, and of course not as underwhelming as Imperial, but it was a hell of an event. I really enjoyed it. And well, now another mark of a good event is like, man, what's going to happen now? Which I keep pestering Imperial, but that's the fact. Like all the titles that came out of Imperial, they could have been there without Imperial even happening. You can say, okay, the next stage of the X-Men also could happen without the Age of Revelation, but the fact that the Age of Revelation was so interesting makes them more interesting as well. It's a nice setup. You know, as I said, Marvel does a lot of event as setups for what's coming next. But if the event is so dispersed and whatever comes next feels dispersed as well. I had to drink some water. But anyways, that was a great event. Looking forward to everything that's coming up after that. Um, I think most of them are worth going back to if anyone skipped them. If I had to say my favorite out of all of the titles, skipping Amazing X-Men, which is the main one, I would say Sabretooth, Iron Frost, mm, Unbreakable X-Men, because I've been fully in love with Gambit and Rogue lately. Um, Radioactive Spider-Man, because you gotta have a Spider-Man. Cloak or Dagger, and yeah, the X-Vengers. Those six. There were plenty more of them. And of course, the main thing. Who knows what's gonna happen next? But as I said, that is the mark of a good event. What's gonna happen next? Which, let me think about it. About Imperial. What do we have? I think they did announce a new Guardians title from like coming out of Imperial Fallout. There's another word for Fallout. That is it's just because I'm watching Fallout. But anyways, X-Men: The Age of Revelation was the overall the best event in Marvel in 2025. Mm, One World or Doom takes the first spot because it was just more important. But as something that is better crafted and overall, like it felt like an event. The Age of Revelation was my favorite of 2025, hands down. Out of all the titles, probably like my one favorite one. I think it was Unbreakable X-Men, but just because I'm so down in into that group of X-Men. So probably that was my favorite one. But anyways, there are still new books coming out, and let's check out some of them, or at least the ones I'm interested in. Some updates, some I think there's nothing new, but there's mostly updates. I wish so much that I could skip directly to this new issue of Absolute Superman. Uh, I still haven't read Absolute Superman 14, so I don't know the end of the what they call the Battle of Kansas. But look at that cover. I never expected that Absolute Superman, the fact that his suit was sort of blackish, like or like a deep blue, I never thought it would mean that attached to the current darkness of the character. I mentioned before when I praised the Absolute Universe that it is kind of like more grim and it does feel like those 90s grim violent days. And of course Absolute Superman is Superman. Superman is like the beacon of wrath and whatever you want to call it in DC. And I was like, okay, Absolute Superman is gonna stay in that lane, in the lane of the Absolute Universe. But if you see that cover and if you see where they're going, you cannot not be interested in what they're gonna do with Absolute Superman coming out the Battle of Kansas. And that's my southern accent. Of Kansas. You gotta be interested in what they're gonna do because whichever way or whichever route they take with Superman, it can be the same as Superman in the regular universe. It's gonna carry the baggage of Absolute Superman, which one of the more curious elements of it is the fact that he doesn't really have that strong parent parental guidance, you could call it. In Absolute Superman, he wasn't like raised by the Kents. He just met them. So there's a slightly less connection, so he's a little bit more unhinged. But man, this looks so interesting. So interesting. Next. I recommended this book when they announced the first one, right? Um The Devil on My Shoulder. I thought that it was going to be kind of like more supernatural, more horror oriented. But the first issue came with a trigger warning, like because it was just extremely explicit, extremely violent, and I don't know. one of the things I often say, I more than often, I say all the time, that you gotta be really careful with violence and sex in almost every narrative media because it needs to lead to something. Well, The Devil on My Shoulder began like one of those cases, like a lot of explicit, like borderline extreme violence. So you gotta ask the question: does it lead to something? Was it interesting enough? Like, did it just push you away or pull you in? In the case of this book, I'm half and half. I do think it was a bit too much, but at the same time, I keep this hope that they're gonna use this setting to do more than a revenge story, which is not a spoiler. It is a revenge story. I think they're gonna do something more special using the medium. That's magic of comics. You don't need to have shitty CGI or like overworked, I don't know, weird shit. You can do a supernatural story of revenge here. Definitely. Issue number one left you with all the wounds open in a really sensitive state. So in that sense, it really did work. So I'm really looking forward for it to change. If it doesn't, they might lose me. I don't think they're gonna cry too much about losing me, but whatever. Next, there's another uh, Tim Burton oriented. I already mentioned Return to Sleepy Hollow. Now they're releasing. This is kind of like a sequel, if I understood correctly what the press release said. Like, here's the thing. I'm not the biggest fan of The Nightmare Before Christmas, but I love the music. The story itself is like, yeah, like Tim Burton's kind of like, how can you mention it without being offensive? Like Tim Burton stuff, you know? But the point is, you I never want or I never really look forward to these sort of sequels of these franchises. I don't know why. I don't know why. I think if you can win a lot of like elements or you can get more tools by moving into the medium of comics, some of these franchises do lose a little bit of that. You know, there's hit and miss, especially I think Dynamite has many of the Disney IPs. So many of them lose a lot. Like the Hercules book, for example, it was okay, but it lost the charisma of the animation. It wasn't as funny. It didn't have the songs. So, but then you get like Maleficent. The Maleficent book is really interesting because you can deep dive into the character. You can enjoy having this character have more layers or being more interesting or being more of a person. So it's a sort of a hit or miss. And in case of the Nightmare Before, if you read the whole title, it's like Disney, Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas, The Shiver of Christmas Town. I don't know. It's also being written by Torun Grönbeck, which is someone that I've criticized a little bit for his run on Catwoman. It hasn't really been my favorite. I don't know. It enters in my category of too worthy. That's like a thing that I like to say. But anyways, I'm gonna still check the issue number one for the Shiver of Christmas Town because at least the character design has always been great. I don't know how well the music, the charisma, and the gothicness maybe of the movie will translate to comics. But let's check it out. Next, I don't know how to describe the Orphan and the Five Beasts. This is by writer and artist James Sapoe. This, um, how can you say it? Like this to me, these sort of books are like like a kids book for adults. What do I mean by this? Is that this is the equivalent to eye candy for not necessarily adults. I'm not gonna say that comics are only for adults and be so close-minded, but definitely the disturbing nature of its imagery, the violence, it's not for everyone, but it's just so good to see. Even it's even like, you know, there are some artists and some sort of presentation in comic books that they almost feel like where's Wally, where's Waldo? Wally's in Spanish. Like a where's Waldo book. There's so much shit going on. It's so intense, and sometimes I even forget this story of this book. Like that's how nice to see it is. It's like watching, I don't know, like an anime crossover with an action movie. I don't know, the closest you get to watch like I don't know, like an Avengers Endgame final battle thing in comics books is something like this. I think it's worth it even for the art alone. Something that happened to me with several of like these kind of like writer and illustrator like combos. I mean, I'm not gonna say nobody can be good at everything, but but anyways, this is a really interesting book and a feast for the eyes. And if it's even for that, I recommend it. If it, maybe it's only that, it's more than enough. Next, I mentioned before the criticism that they get to the current run of Venom by Al Ewing and Carlos Gomez. And the current storyline has Venom sort of being exposed and facing Madame Mask. Um, it's really strange. And what I want to say about Venom 253 right now, what I want to say is that I'm beginning to feel the frustration that many people had with this book, particularly because I feel like the potential that I wanted to see hasn't been properly exploited. I think the dynamic between Mary Jane and the Venom symbiote has been great, but I don't think they have taken it to places that originally it seems that they were gonna take them. Meaning that Mary Jane's mind, attitude, personhood, overall, it would affect the Venom symbiote and take it different to different places. But it doesn't really feel like that. Even more so during the latest issues numbers. No, it's a comic issue 253, right? It get even sort of worse. It began to feel like a setup for whatever comes next with Venom, and I didn't really like that. I think these are strong starting ideas and stories. They have high impact at the beginning, and then they dilute into being just a setup for what comes next. We already know that Hela is coming back. I mean, not coming back, she never left, but they're sort of like making something similar to what happened in Marvel Rivals, the video game, with Hela and the symbiotes. And we know what happened in Eddie Brock's Carnage. So everything starts to feel like a setup. And man, I really wish they would be courageous enough to keep Mary Jane as Venom for a longer time, because only then it would really feel like it has some impact. But this is a book that, sadly enough, I think was plagued by controversy and bad publicity. And you know, the comic books are not like bulletproof against that. They in the editorial room, they are reading all of this. They're like really like, how can you say, paying attention to all of this. So they definitely shake things around. And I think Venom has been one of those. I think they probably tone it down and I don't know. But anyways, Then you say like, how is this a recommendation then? Well, because you already invested in it and you never lose hope after all. This world of comic books is so fast and things happen faster than you wanna think about them. I think that's why they do publicity to the new events like months before they happen because the rhythm is just too fast, which I don't really care for, but that's how it is. That's Venom. And the next are like my two main recommendations coming from the recently reviewed Age of Revelation. We are like jumping straight into the shadows of tomorrow, and to me, the new Wolverine, which was Wendigo in the Age of Revelation event, I don't know, it just made me think about the last volume that I really like about Wolverine when he was dying and he was losing his powers and whatever. Like that's like 5 years ago or something. I feel like Wolverine, even more than characters like Spider-Man and everything, those characters that seem to fall always in the same place. Wolverine is one of those, but the thing with Wolverine is that his same place is a place of such intensity and such kind of like controversy. If Peter Parker is a character in Marvel that is always in that, as I've said before, roller coaster of being on top and then we're having a tragedy, being on top, then having a tragedy, then being on top. Wolverine is never on top. Wolverine hasn't been on top since he was the headmaster in the school back like what? That's like 10 years ago. Since he was a teacher, he hasn't been on top. Even his small role in the current Uncanny X-Men, like even that has been just like he's just there. Because whenever you have a solo story of Wolverine, it always involves massive tragedy. And his participation in the Age of Revelation was sort of like that as well. So, am I recommending the new solo Wolverine book because I feel it's gonna be different? Not necessarily, but as the way I see it, you get into like a point. You know, these characters are immortal and they will always be. But you get into a point where you need to make something happen, something a little bit stronger, a little bit different. Last thing that happened with Wolverine was his death, which of course now we know it wasn't as such, but the road toward his death was great. I've been trying not to read everything what the Shadows of Tomorrow itself is gonna be, or what it means for every character. I don't want to spoil myself. But Wolverine, as I said, you get this stasis, you get this continuous type of stories and development of the character, always the same. And then poof, you get a moment where it can change. And I feel like coming out of the Age of Revelation is one of those things. It's completely one of those things that could give you the setup for a nice Wolverine story. And Wolverine is Wolverine. So I'm really, really, really gonna pay attention to this book. I don't know. I don't think he's gonna die again or something. You know? I don't know. And I don't know what would make a good sort of novelty Wolverine book. That's why I'm not a writer, just a ball guy. So leave it to Saladin Ahmed, who is a writer for this one, to try to surprise us. And last but not least, obviously, and the book of the week, of course, is the epilogue of the Age of Revelation, the X-Men. Um, Here's where the whole event as a setup comes into not like a full circle, but here is where everything that has been like how do you call what you plant a seed? Planted, right? Everything that was planted into during the event starts to grow. This is not an instant explosion, but this is the setup. Like this is where you set up the what the next, no, not 5 years. 5 years will be much, but at least, at the very least, this is where you begin to understand 2026 for the X-Men. So you need to pick up this book if you were either mildly interested in it, and if you liked it at all. I don't know. I don't know. The whole point is that I've been praising the Age of Revelation, and of course, as I said, one of the best things about it is that it was a great setup for what's coming next. So here are the basis of what's coming next: the Shadows of Tomorrow. And I gotta give props to the cover. Cover is awesome. Cyclops, like with magic soul sword, like ready to fucking kill. Well, he is Revelation. We might forget about it, but it is Revelation in the present. He's not Doug. He's not Doug anymore. He's Revelation now. He already is. So that makes for a great first week of 2026 of comic books. And I really wish, and I'm gonna mention it for the last time, I swear. And I really wish Imperial had been better. I really wish it had. I wonder, this is the moment where us people that comment and read, consumers and critics and everything, would love to have a like to be a fly on the wall on the editor's room, and like to get into the mindset of these creators and try to understand if there ever was like an idea to aim higher, like, or what were they aiming for? There must have been a moment where they go like, okay, we are gonna do this with these characters, and our objective is to take people into, I don't know, this sort of drama, or like to introduce people to these sort of characters, or to make them interested into this sort of timeline. But that didn't really felt like that for Imperial as it did for Age of Revelation and One World Under Doom. When these events ended, you could see what they wanted you to see. You could feel what they wanted you to feel, and you became interested in what they wanted to offer from then on. But that wasn't the case for Imperial. It ended, and you were like, huh? you know? But, anyways, that is the first week of 2026. I hope everybody had a great end of the year. And man, I have no fucking idea what 2026 is gonna bring. But as long as there are comic books there to keep us sane, I guess we're gonna be fine. So until next week, read on, and to me, my X-Men. I don't like that catchphrase. To me, my X-Men. Yeah, right. Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.